now invite Mr. Ramadan to open the case of the opposition.
I'll start with you mentioned compromise. I'll start with that later, but what I'd like to begin with is a brief history. To understand the frustration of Palestine, you have to understand the foundations of Israel. And laying out the foundations of Israel and the methods by which it was established, I leave it to you to consider whether by any metric or any moral standards, Palestinians can truly be regarded as aggressors. The brief history. In 1915, Britain asked the Arabs for their support against the Turks in exchange for them in exchange they would have independence in the regions of the Arab world. Their independence was regarded as a gift rather than a right. 2 years later, in 1917, Lord Balfour issued the famous Balfour Declaration, which promised the Zionists a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Why did Britain issue the Balfour Declaration, you may ask? Well, I can certainly tell you why it was not declared. It was not issued out of any benevolence that Lord Balfour had or the administration felt towards the Jewish people. 10 years earlier, under Lord Balfour's government, the first ever anti-immigration bill, the Aliens Act, was passed in Parliament. This was essentially to prevent Jews that were escaping persecution in Russia, they were fleeing the pogroms, to come to the UK. So it was certainly not benevolent. The British administration was then left with two conflicting promises: the promise of Arab independence and the Balfour Declaration. It was the latter that was to become the priority for foreign policy. 2 weeks before traveling to Jerusalem to become the High Commissioner for Palestine in 1920, Herbert Samuel wrote, "What is practicable now in Palestine is one thing, what the present measures will lead to is another. For the time being, there will be no Jewish state, there will be restricted immigration, there will be cautious colonization. In 5 years, the pace will probably be accelerated and will grow after progressively speed. In 50 years, there may be a Jewish majority in the population, then the government will be predominantly Jewish, and in the generation after that, there may be what might be properly called a Jewish country and a Jewish state." So we already have the plan, this displayed out there by the policymakers in Palestine, to make it impossible for the Palestinians to have any sort of independence. This essentially was the mandate policy of Britain. Now, this policy was, the policy was to subordinate the rights of the Arabs to those of Jews. These are not my words. The position was reaffirmed by the words of policymakers at the time. Churchill, as the Secretary of Colony, stated in the Commons in 1921, "The difficulty about the promise of a national home for the Jews in Palestine is that it conflicts with our regular policy of consulting the wishes of the people in the mandated territories." That is, the indigenous people were simply not consulted. The Palestinians were denied representative institutions. Why? Because they were legitimately used to limit immigration. Not just any immigration, but immigration with the clear purpose of ethnic cleansing. You may wonder again why the British administration chose their national home for the Jewish people over the independence of the indigenous Arab people. The simple answer is that the Arabs were viewed as lesser people, subhumans. Again, these are not my words. In 2017, transcripts of secret testimonies that were given during the 36 to 39 Arab revolt to the Peer Commission were released by the UK's National Archives. It is extremely revealing. When questioned about Britain's foreign policy towards the Arabs, Churchill responded as follows: "The Balfour Declaration is the prime and dominating pledge on which Britain must act. All questions of self-government in Palestine are subordinate to its discharge." He goes on to say, and this is why some people say Zionism is racism. He goes on to say, "The great hordes of Islam have smashed Palestine up, turning it into a desert. Where the Arab goes, it is often desert." He adds, quote, "I do not admit that wrong has been done to these people, while the fact that a stronger race, that is the Jewish race, a higher grade race, or at any rate a more worldly race, to put it that way, has come in and taken their place. I do not admit it," end quote. Again, these are literally his words. Things haven't changed much since. The view that the Arabs are lesser people is still implicitly held today by Western governments, where they are still debating how many children Israel can legitimately kill. It's still a matter of debate. Now, I'll fast forward a bit. With Britain out of the picture, the biggest barrier to peace became the greed for land. In the words of Shlomo ben Ami, Israel's never-ending dream of expansion and Lebensraum have always stood in the way of peace. Shlomo ben Ami is the Foreign Secretary of Israel, former Foreign Secretary. The greed was clearly displayed in 1967, when Moshe Dayan, the commander that oversaw the taking of the Golan Heights, admitted that the taking of the Golan Heights had nothing to do with the security of Israel. In his words, they were thinking about the Heights land. Listen, I'm a farmer too, and I know about it. I saw them and I spoke to them. They didn't even try to hide their greed for the land. The land greed continued, or I divert from the speech. He mentioned the idea of concession. Now, given the historical context, you have to think about what a concession means for the Palestinians. Concession for the Palestinian means leaving your land to an pernicious occupying power. One piece of land that the Palestinians concede, in the moral standards, is 10 times as much as the Israelis concede. What do the Israelis concede when they concede? International law. They concede on abiding by international law. No other nation has existed in the UN that regards human rights as a concession, as a mere concession. He mentioned the 2000 Camp David Accords with Arafat. One, they always say the Israelis offered the Palestinians a state. They should have just swallowed their pride and accepted it. Well, it is not the courtesy of their mothers that they're handing the land, stolen land, back to their own, to the original people. It is by no moral standards can it be compared. And also, just to mention, the 2000, throughout the negotiations of the 2000 thing that the honourable gentleman mentioned, Israel never stopped building settlements. Never, in any peace negotiation. Talk about goodwill in negotiations. In the 2000, the Arab Peace Initiative was a proposal endorsed by the entirety of the Arab League, aimed at ending the Arab-Israeli conflict and achieving a comprehensive peace deal between Israel and the Arab world. They refused. Anwar Sadat proposed in 1971 before the Yom Kippur War. He proposed a peace settlement in which Egypt would recognize Israel in exchange for a return of the Sinai Peninsula. They refused. When did they not refuse? Egypt had to show them military force for them to bring back the land. It was never, when Israel is not forced into peace, the concept of the idea of land for peace is all nonsense, to put it mildly. Now, I'll ask, we've all seen the sights of the children that the Israeli killing machine have massacred in the past 1 year. But this is not uncommon. If you look at the previous conflict in Gaza, you will find, if you speak about proportionality, 3,000 civilians killed as opposed to 60 soldiers killed. You'll find 7,000 civilians killed as opposed to 100 soldiers killed. So this was not a one-of-a-kind conflict. And Israel targeting civilians, I mean, it's now clear in Lebanon, isn't it? It's like, Hamas uses civilians as human shield. Well, what's their excuse in Lebanon? What's their excuse in the previous war? It's because now, October 7th has made us, especially our generation, we haven't properly seen Israel in the past. Now we think that, look at the Arab neighbors, the Arabs were turned into the aggressors in this conflict. The victim became the aggressor, the children are branded the indoctrinated fascists and the freedom fighter terrorists. And mass graves and starvation are dismissed as mere collateral damage. I end by saying that you must ask yourselves when voting for these motions, are these the principles you stand by? Mass starvation. Oh, that's my bad. Are these the principles you stand by? Mass starvation and the killing of over 14,000 children? Or as young Britons, do you want to grow up in a Britain that stands by its principles? In other words, you have to choose a Britain of Israel or a Britain of principles. Thank you.